In the last lecture, we learned what is a refresh token and what is the use of a refresh token. Now in this lecture, let's start working towards our first refresh token. So let's go to VS Code, and here let's go to auth folder, and in there let's go to authcontroller.ts file. So here you will see in this auth controller currently we have two handler methods, two endpoints, the login endpoint and the signup endpoint. And if I go to the login method of this auth service, for that let's right click on this login method and let's go to definition. In there you will see that we are writing the logic of logging in a user. And once a user is successfully logged in, what we are doing is we are creating a JSON web token and we are sending this JSON web token back in the response. Now, in the last lecture, we also learned that a refresh token is nothing but a JSON web token. But that token is created with fewer payload and higher expiration time. For this JSON web token which we are creating here, for that in the payload, we are specifying the ID of the user and the email of the user. And for this token, we are also specifying the expiration time. And this expiration time is 3600 seconds. That means 1 hour. But we learned that for a refresh token, it takes fewer payload and its expiration time is higher. So here what we can do is, just like how we are creating this JSON web token, which we are sending in the response, in the same way, I can go ahead and I can create a refresh token. So I'll call it as refresh token. And for creating this refresh token, I'm only going to use the user ID. So I'm not going to use the email. So in this way, we have fewer payload for this refresh token. And then for this, I'm also going to specify a higher expiration time. So what I'm going to do is in this .env.development, in this environment variable file, let me go and let me copy this line. Let me paste it here. And here, let's say refresh token expires in. Okay. So this I am going to put as 86400. So this is the number of seconds we have in one day. So for the refresh token, we are going to specify the expiration time as 1 day. And now let me save the changes in this file. Let's go to auth module again. And in there, let's go to authconfig.ts. And there, just like how we have created its expires in property, in the same way, I'm going to create one more property. Okay, and I'm going to call it as refresh token expires in. And here I want to use this environment variable. So let me copy this from here and let's specify it here. And for the default value, let's again pass 86400, which is the number of seconds in one day. And then here we are also specifying base 10. So let's save this file as well. And what I will also do is we should also have this config folder. In there we have this env.validation.ts. So here I'm also going to add a validation for refresh token. So what I will do is I'll add two validations actually. Let me go here. Let me copy this JWT token expires in. So for this I'm going to add a validation, and that validation we will add here inside this env.validation.ts file. So what do we want here? Here again we are going to use this joy package, and here we are going to say that this expires in should be a number value and it is required. In the same way, I want the same validation for refresh token. So from here I'll copy the refresh token expires in environment variable and let's add it here. And what I'll also do is, since we are adding the validation for the environment variables, let's also go ahead and let's add the validation for JW2 token audience. And for this, I'm going to copy this validation. So it should be a string value and it is also required. And let's also add the validation for token issuer. Okay, So here also it should be a string value and it is required. Let's save the changes here and let me close this env.validation.ts file, and let's also close this env.development file. And here when we are creating the refresh token, at that time for the expires in property we want to use refresh token expires in. Okay, and rest other things will be same. Now if you see here, we are basically repeating the same piece of code. There are only few difference, like we are using a different expires in property, and for generating the JSON web token we are using this email field, but for generating the refresh token we are not specifying that email field in the payload. But other than that everything is same. So what I'm going to do is, instead of writing the same code again, I will create a function. So here I'm going to create a private function, a private async function, and I'm going to call this function as signed token. Okay, and inside this signed token function I'm going to copy this logic and I'm going to paste it here, and then I'm also going to return the token which will be generated from here. Now here if you see, first of all we do not have this user object. So here, in order to create this payload, we need the user ID and the user email. Now we need user email only for creating the token. For the refresh token, we don't need the email. So here for this method, I'm going to specify some parameters. So first of all, I need a user ID here, which is going to be of type number. Then what I also want is this expires in, it is going to be different for the access token and it is going to be different for refresh token. The access token will have a shorter expire time, but the refresh token, it will have a higher expiration time. So this is also going to be different for both. So this expiration time also, so here I'm going to specify a property called expires in, which is again going to be of type number. And what I'll do is here for this expires in property, I'll use that parameter, that expires in parameter. And here for the user ID, I'm going to use this user ID parameter. Now we are left with this user email. Now this user email, it is required when we are generating an access token, but it is not required when we are generating a refresh token. So here what I'm going to do is I'm also going to specify a third parameter. I'll call it as payload, but this parameter is going to be an optional parameter. So this parameter we need when we are generating an access token, but we don't need this parameter when we are generating a refresh token. So that's why I'm setting it as optional. And here, let's also specify the type. So here in advance, we don't know what will be the payload. Currently, what we are doing is, in order to generate an access token, in the payload, we are specifying the sub and the email. But later it is possible that you want to generate a more strong JSON web token. So at that time, along with email, you are also specifying other properties like the username of the user or the complete user object. So the payload can change based on the requirement. So what we will do is here we will set the type of this payload as generic, as T, and this T can be any object with any number of fields. And since we want to use generic here, let's also make this method as generic. So here also I'll specify T. Okay. And now in here, if the payload is specified, in that case, we are going to use that payload here. And from that payload, we are going to extract all its properties and their values. So I'm using the spread operator on this. And now, wherever we want to generate a JSON web token, like we want to generate a JSON web token here and we want to generate it here. So there, instead of writing all this code, we can simply call this sign token function. But here I'm not going to call this sign token function directly inside this method. What I'll do is I'll create another reusable method, and from within that reusable method, we will call this sign token function twice. First for generating an access token and second for generating a refresh token. And let's do that in our next lecture. So in this lecture, we created this reusable sign token function. And now in the next lecture, we are going to call this sign token function. This is all from this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.